Hello everybody and welcome back to another review. I'm of course Captain Sidaris, and just a few hundred kilometers away should be Seven Saturn. Hi there.
Hi guys.
Yeah, and of course our Discord isn't just us two. There is also joining us today Dumais, a longtime player and fellow streamer of Company of Heroes. Also, hi to you.
Hello guys, I'm very pleased to be here today. Looking forward to this meeting or this interview. And yeah, like the intro was mentioned, I'm a long-time Co-1 player. I've been playing the game actively since 2007. I actually still have my box with the receipt. I got it on Boxing Day of 2007, so the 26th of December. And I just recently really stopped playing Co-1, so it kind of gives you an idea of like how long I've been playing the game. I basically quit Co-1 when Co-3 came out, so it's in February. But it gives you an idea of like how long I've basically been playing the game for. But yeah, it's definitely my favorite game of all time.
And I have to ask you, how did you get into the game? Was it an advertisement? Was it a present?
Okay, this is actually funny. I actually had a feeling this question was going to be asked, and I kind of thought about it when I was getting inside Best Buy, getting my cable for my microphone. It was not... It's kind of odd to say, but it was actually a YouTube video. And I know back in the day, I had already seen the Co-1 for the American campaign. They have that famous like video at the start of the campaign where it's the D-Day landing. And I wasn't really impressed with it back in the day because I thought it was basically a ripoff from Saving Private Ryan. Like, it really lacked creativity, but it did set the tone of the game, which I really respect and think was the right decision back then. But from a consumer standpoint, I was like, it just seems like a Saving Private Ryan ripoff. I'm not interested. I'll pass. It was actually the expansion. It was Opposing Fronts. I had found a random video online, and it was someone playing as Panzer Elite in a 4v4. And what really got me into the game was the pure fact that you could actually put German infantry, so you could put Panzer Grenadiers inside of a half-track. And not only could you transport these troops around the map, but they could actually shoot out of it. And that, I don't know why, but back in 2007, when I saw this video, I was actually trying to look for it a few days ago, but I can't find this video anymore. I know it's still out there. But when I saw the fact that there were guys shooting out of the half-track while I was driving around and you could unload them and load them back in, I was just blown away. I was like, I did not know that this was possible in an RTS. And it really kind of gave me flashbacks as to when you were playing, you know, like the original Call of Duty, Battlefield, or Brothers in Arms, where you're playing as like an Allied soldier and you just see a half-track pull up and there's like the doors that open at the back and the Germans just start pouring out of it. That's just what I saw, and I was like, honestly, I feel like this game is kind of like a battle simulator where you can kind of like recreate these iconic moments from like previous World War II single-player games. And that's really what got me into it. And I went ahead, I saw the game at Best Buy, and I just picked it up. Unfortunately, I didn't have a PC powerful enough to get it. So that was a really big buzzkill to me. But yeah, that's really what got me into it. Like, just visually and in terms of the technology, like you could destroy cover, you could crush walls. I was like, this is basically kind of like a Battlefield game, because back in the day, you know, we had Battlefield, which, you know, advertised the destruction of environment. And I was like, you could do this in this game. And I was just blown away by it. And when I was actually speaking to other players who've played Co-1, Co-2, many of them started off as comp stompers, such as myself. Like, we didn't play the game because we wanted to be competitive with it. We played it because visually and in terms of the audio, like the overall presentation of the game of Co-1 and Co-2 was just really well executed. And that's really what got us into it. We started off with, you know, playing against bots. And then eventually you get to a point where the AI is like, whether it's normal or expert, you kind of realize that the AI has a specific pattern and you can start beating it very easily, and it kind of no longer becomes a challenge. And that's kind of where you're like, okay, you know what? Like, I've done 10,000 like bridge games. Let's play a different map and let's actually play against a player. And that's kind of where it takes off. Like, you have to play the game because you enjoy it and you respect it. And then I think that's where you make a commitment. You're like, you know what? Like, I want to take it to the next level. I want to play multiplayer and see what that's like. And it's just a learning experience, and you just, you know, it goes on. And you just take it from there. So yeah, it was basically a random YouTube video that really was like, wow, this is very impressive. That was like, okay.
I find it interesting that early in the YouTube history, it already had such a big influence in the buying decisions.
Yeah, well, like I said, it's really because back then, I really got into World War II from Call of Duty 2. So that was the one that you had on PC and on the 360 back in the day. And like I said, when I saw that half track just driving around, the first game I thought of was literally Call of Duty 2. I think it's in the first Russian mission of that single player game after you throw the potatoes in the bathtub because the commissar tells you that grenades are too valuable to waste for training. So you guys have to use potatoes. And then literally like, your first engagement in that single player mission is a half track. It pulls up and it unloads a bunch of infantry from it. And that was the first thing I thought of. And I was like, dude, that is pretty cool. And then obviously when you look at the unit roster that's in the game, like they have everything. There's the Sherman, they have like they have the Panther, the Tiger, the KT. Like these are all iconic units that you see in a single player like World War II game. And here you actually get to control them or play against them. And I was like,
Yeah,
this is
yeah,
so cool. Dude, that's really what got me into the game. I was like, I feel like I can play also, with the fact that you could play as the Germans too, like that to me was really cool. Another thing, like even though it's a single player game, I still consider Company of Heroes a single player game. I don't think Co 1 was ever meant to be played competitively. I think what happened was there was a pretty large interest to get it to that stage. But I thought like the Panzer League campaign was really cool as well. It was just very unique because back then, dude, there was no single player game that ever allowed you to play as Germany. Just wasn't a thing. I don't think it'll ever be a thing now in this political climate, but that's a whole other discussion. But, Co really was like the only game that allowed you to play as Germany. I think the only exception now is Battlefield 5. They had that Tiger campaign, but I think Co was like the first one to really do it. And I was like, oh, that's pretty ballsy. I respect that. And it was well executed, really well done, Operation Market Garden.
Yeah, basically, normally I would also tell the audience what Company of Heroes is, but you said it nearly all. It's a RTS game from 2006. I would more maybe compare it to Band of Brothers, not Saving Private Ryan.
Yes, that's true. Well, actually, I did a paper about this in university because I graduated in a 3D school in Montreal. So I have a Bachelor of Arts in 3D for video games. And I actually did a research about Company of Heroes. And it actually turns out it was never supposed to be a World War II game. It was actually supposed to be some sort of sci-fi game. But back then, World War II was just so popular with Band of Brothers and obviously Saving Private Ryan. You could tell the game really took influence from these two products of entertainment, and then obviously Co 2 was completely based off of Enemy at the Gates, and I would actually argue Co 3 unfortunately doesn't have anything to base itself off, which I think like Co 3 is a good game, but it kind of doesn't. It missed the ballpark, I think, with the tone. That's another topic, but again, for Co 1, it's 100% Saving Private Ryan and Band of Brothers, 100%. But back in the day, yeah, it was actually supposed to be some sci-fi game, and then they looked at the like Call of Duty, Battlefield, like these were all very popular World War II games. So they decided, well, we have these mechanics in place for World War II. Like this could easily work for World War II setting. Why not make the switch to that theme? And like they made like a super fantastic game.
yeah.
Honestly, like graphically, I think it holds up amazingly well. If you want to push it even further, you can go ahead and download like a texture pack, and it's amazing the amount of detail you can actually get in. Like when I used to stream Co 1, I would run several different types of textures, and people would always be like, "Is this a mod?" I'm like, "No, it's a texture pack." And they're like, "What the hell?" And you could zoom in, and you could see like on the BAR, like you could see like a serial key, where it's made and everything. It's just insane the amount of detail. But yeah, it truly is honestly, the more I think about Co 1, it brings back a lot of memories. Like so many, I used to do so many in-house games with my friends from high school. It wasn't a very popular game at my school. Like back then it was Modern Warfare. That was the big game which I also participated in. But to me though, this game was just it'll always hold a special place in my heart and my mind because it truly is a fantastic game. Like the voice acting, the tone, like even the graphics. Originally, Co 1 was supposed to have Truesight, just like Co 2 had, but they actually ran into optimization issues. So that whole idea or that whole the whole concept of Truesight just got dropped overall and then got kept for Co 2. So that was very interesting to discover as well when I was doing my research.
Can you explain what Truesight is? I'm not familiar.
Truesight is basically if I'm behind a building, I cannot see what is on the other side of the building because realistically, right, if I'm standing in front of a wall, I can't see what's on the other side. But because of Co 1's age, they didn't have the technology back then to make it so that, well, we know that there's a wall that's like that's like 15 feet tall, but unfortunately, like we would have to process like let's say I have a squad of riflemen, which is 6 guys. If I have 6 guys behind the wall, they should not be able to see what's behind it if it's taller than them. But True Sight
Yeah.
allows you if I have like a massive dense hedgerow along the road and I have a rifleman on one side of the hedgerow in Company of Heroes 1, I can see what's on the other side, even though I haven't been able to actually go through it. I have 360 vision everywhere on the map, even though in real life, if I have this massive hedge, massive wall, or massive house in front of me, I would not be able to see on the other side. So that was something that was experimented with Co 1, but when I did my research, it was I the conclusion that was made from my research was that they had to drop it because already back then Co 1 was a pretty heavy beast to run on a PC. Like I'll always remember when I got home to my place, I put the disc in and I got the installer, and the installer back then was a white window and it would do a step-by-step check. It was checking like your RAM, your memory, and then when it got to my graphics card, I got a red X, and I was like, "Oh crap!" And like everything else was green, but as soon as I got to that red X, it's that the installer said, "Oh, you do not meet the graphical requirements. Installation will now close and fail." And I was like, "God damn it!" Oh yeah, I had to wait like I think 2 months before I was able to get a new PC and actually play it at my place. But meantime, I actually installed it at one of my dad's friend's place and would play it like once every 2 3 weeks for like a few hours. But yeah, and ironically, because I was so invested in the game or really interested in the game, what actually happened was I couldn't play the game, but I watched a lot of YouTube content about it. So I watched a few campaign missions, but then eventually I actually started watching like high level like tournaments and stuff. But when I was able to actually play the game, there were like frequent patches because the game was actually alive back then. So there were patches that would come in and completely swing the meta, completely fix the bugs. And so a lot of the things just wouldn't work anymore. So I kind of just stuck with single player, comp stomping, and I didn't really get involved with multiplayer probably until like a year later when I kind of got bored of just playing the bridge maps and just playing against the AI.
You mentioned the original disc version. I sadly couldn't find any information if it still works. I guess the multiplayer, of course, doesn't work. The support ended in 2013, but single player and LAN, maybe?
The way it works is basically the multiplayer doesn't work at all with the CD key, because back then you had one main account and you can make 4 additional profiles. And back then there were a lot of players, a lot of the high level players who would literally remake their account as soon as they took a loss. And these were known as Smurfs. So you had no idea who these people were because they would always like remake these new profiles. They would be testing out new strategies, hiding them. It was kind of very annoying because you had no idea who you were up against. And obviously, if you're up against a player who is making a new account, he's obviously like a rank 1. And if you're like a rank 10 and you lose to a rank 1, you lost a lot of points. So it was actually a pretty big problem back in the day. So everyone kind of played super try hard and super meta. There was very little room for like experimenting. If you wanted to experiment, you did that with a brand new account. So the way it worked is you had to log into like the THQ thing, but then obviously THQ went bankrupt and eventually the servers got shut down. So what they told you to do is you basically had to grab your CD key that was given in the copy and just apply it onto Steam, and that's how you were able to play online. There is a way to actually go back to the older version of the game. There's someone on YouTube called Go History, And I think what he's doing is he's using the CD version of the game, and he's going onto online websites to find the patches, and he's applying them to his game that way because he's actually going through all the various stages of the game where there were a bunch of bugs. Like there was a bug where the Puma was able to like crush tank traps. There was another one where if you like you would get a damaged engine randomly. It was really bizarre, but very interesting though, because that was actually a phase of the game that I never played because, like I said, I got on board in Company of Heroes when the expansion came out. So there's like 1 year of balancing tuning that I completely missed, and that was one of them because this was only US and Ver that was being affected. So yeah, that was pretty interesting. But I kind of heard of these bugs as I was reading stuff on game replays.
Currently, of course, Steam is the place to go. Also, during the many Steam sales, it's very cheap to get.
Yes, I think it was $3 actually 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, it's unbelievable cheap. And the sad part maybe is it's a little bit hard to find a community nowadays. I know there are multiple discords, but there's no central place which guides the players into the right direction. But maybe you can give us also there a little bit of oversight.
For Code 1, there kind of is a community. It's actually on game replays. The problem is no one is active on game replays anymore. But back in the day, like game replays was that's where I got all of my info. I couldn't play the game, but when I realized there was an entire site with practically like it wasn't like a full wiki, but it had a breakdown of like, okay, this is what the unit costs. This is the upgrades that are available. This building allows you to make this. Like it gave you like all the information. I mean, I can send you the link right now so you can take a look at it while I'm describing it because it really was like this was a gold mine. This is where the community was. Co2 kind of had something similar. It was like a website made by like a few indie guys, and there was a bit of a fallout. Co3 unfortunately doesn't have anything like this, but I feel like these type of websites don't really exist anymore because you have stuff like Discord, which is why Relic has like an official Co3 Discord. But this was where I got all of my stuff. I mean, I could just send you like something here. Like, back then, right? I was looking at Panzer Elite, so naturally this was the stuff I was looking at. And you have like a full breakdown of what each of the doctrines do, what each of the buildings do. You could see the units, the upgrades that are available, and like that's just the strategy section. There's an entire section dedicated to tournament replays, guides, this really was the community, and obviously because it's a forum, right? People can discuss things freely, and like you would have people posting stuff like, "How do I deal with Brits on this map? How do I deal with this on this map?" So it kind of had a community, but the thing is, it's like this game is it came out like super long ago, so people have naturally moved on to Code 2, and some people just are too old, they don't have time for these games anymore, so they just completely abandon the community overall. I would say the new community now is basically it's on Twitch. It really is. There's still like an active community there. I'll still drop in from time to time, but it's still there. Like now they're kind of like on Discords, and in order to get into those Discords, you have to be like active on those Twitch communities. But like it's very difficult because Company of Heroes 1 has so much content. Uh, like it's not like Co 2 where it's very straightforward. Like Co 1 has like different armor types. There's different infantry types. Like you're like an SMG will do like more damage to this type of infantry unit, but it'll do less info to this type of unit. But the game doesn't tell you this. Like you actually have to do your research and look this up. Like some people don't know that like heroic units will take more damage from flamethrowers. Some units will take less damage from flamethrowers. Like the airborne units will take more damage from like anti-air guns and stuff like that. But like the game doesn't tell you this. You really have to do your own research. So there's a lot of information to take in at once. And this of course, this is without even like this is assuming that the player has a basic understanding or basic knowledge about World War II. Like if you don't know what a Panther tank is and you have no knowledge of World War II, you have no idea what a Panther tank is. Like but since some of us are like World War II experts, and like we know this conflict through the back of our heads. We know that a Panther is like a medium tank, and it should easily win against a Sherman, and it does in Company of Heroes 1. It just does because I mean it's expected of it, right? But if you don't know anything about World War II, like you might be like, well, why isn't my Sherman beating a Tiger? It's like, well, realistically, you know, a Tiger had this, had this kind of armor, this type of gun. So like even if you come into Co 1 with a generalist like a general knowledge of World War II, there's still a lot to learn, like in terms of like the competitive play, the different armor types, the different vehicle types, the timings. There's a lot to learn. So it's unfortunately, I just don't think it's worth the effort because like I said, like if you want to get active in multiplayer, you are really scrapping the bottom of the barrel. Like you have people who are bug abusing, people who are cheating, and for those who remain, they have been playing the game since release, and it's you just can't catch up to the amount of info that we know from the back of our heads. You just don't. It's impossible. Like every day, like I wouldn't say every day, but almost once, like every month, there was always something relatively new that I would learn about Company of Heroes 1 when I was playing. Uh, there was a streamer that showed me like an ability with Panzer Elite where you have like this half track that can immobilize vehicles. I always thought that it was the first shot or the second shot that granted the immobilize. He actually showed me that it was four shots, four consecutive shots that could grant an immobilize as long as you didn't move the vehicle. But I didn't know this. For ever since the game launched, every time I would use that ability, I would stun the vehicle with my first two shells because that's what I thought it would do. And then I would instantly move the vehicle. But if I move the vehicle, I'm canceling the rest of the ability. I did not know that for the longest of time. And I actually felt stupid. I was like, wow, this is my main faction, and it's a key unit in my roster. And I did not know this since playing the game since 2008. And I was told about this like a year ago. Like,
I
let that
think
sink in.
this is a general problem of very, very many RTS
Yes,
that you have to either find out by random, by accident, or being told or read it up somewhere. But
yep.
there's no actual documentation by the guys who actually created the game. And I think this is a very really common theme in RTS.
Yeah, it really is. I'm actually like for I don't know if you guys are aware of it. I don't know if you guys have been following Co 3, but Co 3 just recently released an update. The balancing is a bit scuffed, but there one new quality of life change that they did is in the tooltip now, whenever you get an upgrade or use an ability, it will actually tell you what that ability does. So let's say if I use like the bar suppressive volley, well, it's like in Co 3 they call it pouring on them. It'll actually tell you you gain like 30% more damage, but your movement is slowed by 50%. So now you actually have an idea of like, okay, I actually know what this ability does. Before it would just say you deal more damage, but it's like that could mean like multiple things. Are we talking about like, are we talking about 5%, 20%, like 70%? Like these are big value differences,
Yeah,
but like you
yeah.
have no idea what they are. So
Yeah, it can
so yeah.
make a life or death difference. If you're counting on the unit being strong enough with this boost, and it just isn't, this can turn an entire battle.
Yeah, exactly. So again, like, so that's the thing. Like, Koan has always had a community. It's just because of its age, that community has drastically shrunk. Like, I only know two people that used to be active on game replays who are still active with the game, right now, like on Twitch. There's only two remaining that I know of. So that just puts it in perspective as to how the community is just like, it's just no longer there. It's really a thing of the past. But like I said, it's sad that but it's just, you know, honestly, I'm surprised the game even had a community for that long. It still baffles me, but it just shows you how like we really do love the game. Like we were there, many of us were there since like day one. And so like we've seen the ups and downs of the game. It's just like it's the type of game that you just have to enjoy overall. Like for me, I like the game, but like I said, if I'm talking from like a competitive aspect, I just prefer Co 3 because you know Co 3 is new. There's always new things to discover. The game is actually being updated despite its terrible launch. So there's room for like different strats to try out. It's just like Co 1, I played it so much during the pandemic that I just naturally got a bit of a fatigue out of it. And I was really just facing the same thing over and over again. So it just naturally, I was like, you know what, I'm kind of tired of this. Just waiting for Co 3 and we'll take it from there. So yeah.
Before we go more into the pros and cons, I think we should also give Saturn a few history nuggets. You mentioned already so much, so I will keep this a little bit short. The biggest thing for a company in 2006 was basically that at peak times, over 100 people worked on the game, which is really impressive.
So wait, you're saying there were 100 people that worked on this game, or you meant in general in video games?
No, on Company of Heroes, really on this title.
Okay.
At least that was the information I got from multiple reviews and multiple interviews. And another very important thing in gaming history, I would say, is that it was the first commercial successful video game, and I think even really the first game which supported DirectX 10.
Like I said, yeah, visually, this game has aged like fine wine. I think it looks better than Code 2. It looks better than Code 3. Now, sure, when you zoom in and you look at the models, yes, you can see the polygons. Yes, you can see the textures are not like they're not like 2K, they're like 1K. But like overall in the presentation, in terms of the lighting and the shading, the game just looks, I just think it looks better. Like I could show you like some of the assets that they've actually recycled in from Co 1 and Co 3. Like they've recycled the Wehrmacht quarters, the Panzer Support Command, the tank depot from US. And like it just looks better in Co 1 because of the lighting, the way the shaders are set up. There was actually a Reddit post I saw for Co 3 where someone pointed out that someone had inverted the shaders in one of the trailers. There was something wrong with the tires, and someone had basically someone gave us a step-by-step guide for Relic to follow on how to fix it. He said like there was a texture file that was inverted, and I was like, good lord, that's kind of embarrassing that there's someone who's literally pointing out the issue and showing them how to fix it. But my biggest issue with Co 3 is, like I said, it's the overall presentation. There's something that they really missed the park on that, and I just feel like Co 1 just did a fantastic job. So, but yeah, if you're saying there was 100 people, I'm actually very shocked to hear that because Relic recently fired 121 people in June. I think there were over 300 people working on this game. So that is extremely embarrassing to hear that number. 100 people? Damn.
Well, on the other side, I would say it's impressive. Back then, a game studio had, what, 20, 30 people at max? It was really rare that it exceeded that.
It was very different. Yeah, I remember watching the Call of Duty documentary. I think the original Call of Duty was made with like 40 people. It was very different. Very, very different indeed. I think it's because back then these games were made with passion. I feel like now a lot of video games have become more of like a 5 to 9 job. I mean, which is fine, right? I'm not saying that every game dev should be crunching 70 hours a week, but there is generally like the voice acting in this game, I think is just phenomenal. And then sometimes when I hear the voice acting in Co 3, I'm like, I find it hard to believe that someone sat in a booth and heard these lines and was like, yeah, this is good. I just like I find it hard. Like there's so many weird lines in Company of Heroes 3 and even in Company of Heroes 2 that I'm like, did they really just be like, yeah, like we're just gonna accept this for what it is? Like I'm like, it's just weird. But like Co 1, I just feel like it really was made with love. There was AE, which we mentioned earlier. He made a video back then comparing Co 1 and Co 2. And there was someone, it was the top comment on that video, and it was someone who was the lead animator. And he basically commented that he said Co 1 was made with love. And he said that was the biggest difference. And he actually pointed out that Co 2 actually recycled a lot of stuff from Co 1. Because I recently found out that Co 2 is actually a heavily modded version of Co 1. Like they're actually very similar in terms of the engine. It's just that Co 2 has been completely modded, but it makes sense because I've actually noticed that when I played Co 2, there were certain animations. I noticed the MG42 team was a complete it's the same thing from Co 1, the exact same reloading. Like everything is like there's a lot of animations that are recycled from company, like the grenade throws, the machine guns. I'm guessing probably some of the tanks. Like there's no reason to have a new tank rig. Just recycle the ones from Company of Heroes 1, I guess. But I think that's why even with a small number, I mean, 100 is not small, but if you compare it to like Co3's massive labor pool of like 300 plus people, um, I guess that just shows you that it was just a different mentality back then. I really think these projects were made with love, and I guess they really wanted to make something that was truly like eye-opening and awesome.
I think that is actually the biggest aspect about that. When you come up with a new game, not a Company of Heroes 2, 3, or whatever, but the very first one, you have
Yeah,
no idea how the audience will receive this.
yeah, for
And
sure.
you have to make it count, whatever you do. You have to give it your best. And it's not just about making money, it's actually about kind of surviving the audience.
Yeah,
And when you already have this bonus, you already created a good game like Company of Heroes 1, and you're kind of having a game at home, you know the terrain, you know what to do, you just redo it again, and it's kind of expected to be cheaper somehow. And I believe the entire industry has this problem that everything has to, you know, um, gain money real fast, real easy. It isn't
hmm
important that the game has a certain quality. It isn't important that people are really happy with the result, just as long as it makes enough money. The ones who give the money for the project, Company of Heroes 2, 3, whatever, they expect it has to make more money, and that's what counts. It's not important that the
yeah,
game is good. And I
yeah, for
think that
sure.
this pours out of a lot of games. And from what you two described to me, it sounds pretty much like with many games around the time to, let's say, 2005, 2006,
Oh
maybe
yeah, like
seven, where games were still in development, not just for the money, because it was still kind of still not entirely charted territory. Today, when
yeah,
you think RTS or shooter has been done 1,000 times, you know what to do, kind of. And yeah, it's expected that you just walk your way through this terrain and make a whole lot of money with it, while
hmm
totally losing track of what actually was the initial goal: make a good game.
yeah. I would say like that's kind of why I think you're seeing. I know a lot of people who are actually more interested in some of the indie games now. I think the best example would probably be BattleBit. I mean, that game was like $15, but I know that it had a massive following from the Battlefield community. Like I played only Battlefield 1, the World War One version, and then I was really disappointed with Battlefield 5. But I know that for the recent 20, Battlefield 2042, like the recent one that really flopped, a lot of players were actually just playing BattleBit because they're like, this is literally what we asked for in a AAA game that we didn't get, and here we're having it for $15,
Yeah.
and like we're just having a lot of fun. Now, obviously, it doesn't have the same content as something like Battlefield because it was made by three devs, but like they've literally like they've looked around, they said, okay, well, what do players want? Well, they want this. Okay, well, let's give them this. Like, let's literally do it. So.
And I think that
Like,
this is actually the big difference. Coming back to your statement with those
yeah, yeah,
70
yeah.
hours crunch time and so on,
Oh yeah.
I think, or I believe, that the devs creating Company of Heroes 2 and 3 would have done more if people had let them.
Yeah.
If you can do your job properly and nobody is holding back saying to you, that's fine, that's enough, don't invest any more hours on that, you can reach a totally different level. But when someone tells you, no, that's okay, keep it at that, do another task because we have to save money on that, don't invest too
Yeah,
many
yeah.
hours, things turn not out as well as they could. And it has nothing to do with the people actually doing the
Mhm.
work, or not necessarily even the people organizing this work. But it's kind of the one who pays you is ordering you to do things in his way, in his fashion. And
No, I
this
agree.
is something I would really be interested in hearing, this part of the story, how the people who create such games look on their own work. Because I know from my personal experience, there are always situations where you think, I could have done that better. Just give me a day more and it would be
Yeah.
cool. But
hmm
no, someone decided it's good enough.
No, for
And
sure, for sure.
I would really like to hear the stories of those guys who had to create these games, because when you already have a pre-existing game, kind of a template, it's rather easy in comparison to build up on that and think, how can we make this cooler? How can we polish it more? How can we add some features, or which mechanics actually sucked? Which can we improve? Stuff like that. And when people are being let free in a creative fashion, doing whatever they think, usually it turns out better. Usually. I mean, you really think, what could I do better with what I already got here? When I look at this, how can I improve it? Unless it's already almost perfect, of course.
Yeah, it's kind of like you said earlier, like when you have like already a really successful game like Code 1, it's like, okay, we're gonna make Code 2. Like they didn't straight up copy Code 2, Code 1, I mean, but they try to look for innovation, like innovative ideas. And I think for Code 2, it was the Cold Tech and the Blizzards. Like they were like, okay, since our game is set in Russia, we're gonna have, the Cold Tech, the Blizzards that reduce your line of sight. If you're not inside a building or near a campfire, your troops are gonna start freezing to death, and then you're gonna start losing members. And then like it was a good idea on paper, but then when you actually played it, you're like, this is awful because no one is moving. Like you can't even use airplanes. You can't make any sort of play because you can't see anything. It was just awful and it ended up being scrapped entirely. And then for Co 3, their innovative idea was the height mechanic because it's set in Italy, right? Like these mountainous regions, all this height. And essentially, the height mechanic is kind of similar to like red cover or negative cover in Co 1 and Co 2. If you're above an opponent, you basically negate their cover bonus. And I think you're harder to hit and you have like slightly more accuracy. Even I'm not too sure like what the buffs and the debuffs are, but like you basically do not want to be taking on a unit that has the height advantage over you. And so that naturally just made garrisons even stronger because obviously if you're in buildings tend to be more than one story tall. So obviously if there's guys on the roof or in the upper windows, they're going to deal the full damage on you. So at first it was really poorly received, but I think players have gotten used to it. But it kind of shows you though, like Company of Heroes 1, when you compare it to Company of Heroes 2 and 3, there hasn't been a whole lot that's really changed. So it's kind of like a tricky thing to do. But I feel like RTS games in general are just kind of like they're not as popular as like first person shooters, which is understandable because like we've mentioned earlier, there's a ton of information to read up on, and the
Yeah.
information is not there in your face. It would be like imagine playing Call of Duty and you have access to these attachments, but they don't tell you what these attachments
Hmm. Yeah.
like buff or debuff. That's basically what playing an RTS is. You have a general idea. It's like, oh, this foregrip on your M4 increases accuracy. So does this one. But it's like, yeah, but by how much? Like, which
Yeah.
one is better? That's the thing. And that's really the big problem with RTS games. And I feel like too the devs, I don't know, I'm using Relic here a lot because they tend to do this a lot, but they don't have like any in-depth tutorials. They're very basic. It's like if I were a game dev and I'm making an RTS game, I would want to give as much information to my player as possible so that they can understand why they're like misplaying. It's like I don't know if you guys have played League of Legends, but like when you die, there's a panel that pops up on your screen and it will do a breakdown of like how you took like where did the damage come from. So you could literally tell, okay, my opponent's champion is dealing like 80% of my is dealing 80% of my health from one attack. So now I have to be careful for this. Or like if I got instantly one-shotted as a champion, I can see, okay, there were 3 enemy champions who instantly focus fired me and like just instantly got me. And I feel like that's something that RTS games should really like just like do a massive breakdown. Like honestly, like allow us to see what these damage values are. Like tell me how much they're being increased or how much they're being reduced by, so I can basically have a better understanding of how the game works. Because if you're a casual player and you get frustrated from these things, most of them are not going to sit down and do like an hour, 1 hour of
Yeah.
research.
Yeah.
Like it's not the mentality. Like it's and I agree with that. Like I shouldn't have to sit down and waste my own time in order to like look online on the deep web in order to find Johnny who cracked the code of the game and did a full breakdown.
I think there's an asymmetry in this comparison with shooters. You're totally right. RTS aren't as popular, and I think
Mhm.
part of it is the actual complexity of the game.
It's
I
very
mean,
complex.
um, when you think about our role-play games, it's again very difficult to combine your skills or your cast or whatever you have in there. But in a usual normal shooter, you pick your weapon, maybe you have a certain way of going about the terrain or something like that. But the majority, I believe, is doing the right thing at the right time under time pressure. You have this aspect again, of course, also in RTS. You have to do the right thing at the right time, and you have to be vigilant. But the mere realm of things that you could know, that you could combine, that you have to take care of, is just bigger. And on an intellectual level, I can totally understand when someone says, well, I have my 9 to 5 job here. I was commuting for an hour home and I just want to relax, guys, and I don't want to martyr my mind with stuff like that. A shooter is a lot easier in these terms. But then again, for me, it's the other way around. In a shooter, I would have to really be fast with my decisions. And this is what I personally find very stressful. It makes a huge difference whether you click a pixel to the left or a pixel to the right. While in RTS, usually, okay, it can make a difference, but usually, if your
that's actually we didn't talk about this earlier, but that's actually one of the things I like about Company of Heroes. I liked it because, and I knew it was possible to be good at this game because unlike StarCraft, which requires insane APM, like when I played Code 1, I have my APM was pretty high for Code 1 standards. It was like really it was actually pretty high. I think there was like a Korean guy who always had like a steady 100 APM or CPM. It was very high. My average was like 80 and sometimes up to 90. That's because naturally I played Panzer Elite, which, you know, you're micromanaging all of these light vehicles that can get two-shotted by AT guns. So you really had to be like very, very fast on your micromanagement. But that was what I liked about Company of Heroes. I was like, okay, it's this type of game. And that's kind of why I made the switch to like playing the game more competitively. Because I was like, you know what, dude, like this game is it's making perfect sense. Like, here's a machine gun. I have to flank it. If I get grenades, which cost fuel as a tech, I know that it's all like if I get grenades, right? Let's say I'm playing as a USA, and instead of going for a vehicle which costs fuel, I decide to go for grenades. I have to realize that this will delay my vehicle tech. I'm also investing a lot into my like I'm basically spending my fuel to invest in better anti-infantry. So it's a bit risky. If my opponent pulls out like a vehicle, I may be screwed. And it's like, okay, here's a bolt action rifle. It doesn't fire really fast, but it's firing a large round, and it's usually better at long range. I look at the stats. Yes, the gun is better at long range. I was like, there's a lot of stuff here. It's mainly about positioning, getting the proper counters, executing the right plays. I was like, this is very doable. Like, very doable. I was like, you don't have to be like oh my god, like sweating buckets, you know, because I've actually seen pictures. Huck was a StarCraft 2 pro who had his own. I think he was managing his own StarCraft team at 1.2. He actually wrote a paper and he said like the reason why RTS games are really not popular anymore is because they are very difficult to get into and they're intense, man. Like there've been a few games where I've actually gotten up and I've had like sweaty armpits and like I rarely sweat. I rarely sweat. Sometimes I go to the gym and like unless I'm doing legs and I'm squatting like heavy, I won't really sweat that much. And
but I think it's more on the cognitive part, you know.
Oh yeah,
it's more insane. A conscious effort. While in many shooters, in comparison, you also have to be very vigilant, but it's more
like
on a exactly more on a primal level. Just react fast and on point, and that's okay. You can still lose because you have, let's say, a weapon that doesn't do armor piercing and your opponent is somehow armored. Okay, then you're fucked. But usually you don't have all those parameters. You don't have to really think ahead in this fashion.
Oh yeah, like that's it's a big thing.
And it's as you said, it's easier to get into. Shooting a gun isn't really difficult for most people. They still suck, of course, no doubt about that. But getting into the general game, being, let's say, decent, not really good, but a decent player is in comparison rather easy.
Yeah, and also I like the pacing too. Like, like shooters are really fast paced, right? Like if you compare like Arma to like Call of Duty, it's very different, right? But one thing
Hmm.
I like about Company of Heroes is the pacing. It's very when my first true RTS was Company of Heroes, but I have played Age of Empires too, like at a friend's place, right? So I knew what RTSs were. But when I made the switch from Co to like StarCraft, I got into StarCraft because everyone in high school at one point was talking about it, and there was like this community of guys in my high school that were playing. They played like League of Legends, and at one point I heard them talk about StarCraft, and I was like, huh, I've heard about this game. I know it's an RTS, and I tried getting into it, and I was like, you know what? I don't like these type of games where I have people collecting resources for 3-4 minutes and like nothing's happening. It just wasn't my thing. I was like, I get the idea of having workers like gathering resources, and managing them, but I just didn't like the whole idea of having like one unit scouting the map, nothing really happening until like you get like enough units by like the 4 minute marker to start making like some sort of play. It was kind of the same thing with Age of Empires. I was like, I don't like these type of games. Like I prefer expanding outward with my troops, looking for a fight, fighting for that area, and yeah, and I just feel like Company of Heroes pacing is just better than the other RTSs because you will get into a fight within the first minute of a game because you have to control specific resources which allow you to get like
That is the big difference.
it is
Yeah.
a huge difference. And I'm like, I can't like I remember once I played Age of Empires 2 and I got walled in by like wooden walls in the first like 3 minutes of a game and I was like, what the fuck is this garbage? Like how is this even fun? Like, I'm boxed in. I have no idea what the map is like. So, like, the counter argument can be, well, that's the fun part. Like, you have to scout out the map. It's kind of randomly generated. I'm like, yeah, I get that, but okay, like I found my enemy here, but like I can't really do any serious plays until like I build up, a
Yeah.
decent amount of
Yeah.
troops
Yeah.
and send them out. So I was like, it's not for me. I can see the appeal, but it's hard for me to make a switch to that.
It's this
Very,
fine line between being an actual strategy game and more a tactics game. As you said,
ah,
you have to control the map
yeah,
on getting resources, different
yeah.
resources
Hmm.
on Company of Heroes. While in StarCraft, as you said, you can just gather your stuff in your main base and try and keep
Yeah,
the
yeah.
other ones out. And there are other approaches like in Total Annihilation or to do a comparison to this region system.
Mhm.
The Ashes of the Singularity also has it that you have to control a region to get actual resources, and it
Mhm.
is really a resource necessity to roam the map and get the map under your control. It's not just, well, I have some units here that prevent you from getting to my base. No, actually, you have to head out and get other regions to get resources in the first place. It's not enough to just wall yourself in. It won't
Yeah,
work.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's actually like the worst thing you can do because like you said, like you can't just sit there. Like there's other like you have your side of the map that you should like most balanced maps, right, are 50-50. So if you just sit in your
Yeah.
base while you're giving up your resources while your opponent takes yours, it's like, okay,
Yeah,
well,
exactly. And in StarCraft, in a way, it's also in this game, but you have in comparison a whole lot less resource spots.
yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, I know in StarCraft 2, like you can like do like the fast like I think like what is it? That's Zerg the was it? Yeah,
Hmm.
it's Zerg. I was gonna say Zerglings, but I think that's a unit name. But yeah, Zerg, like I know like they typically tend to expand like really quickly, and I know if you're playing Terran versus Zerg or like Protoss, you have to like there's a reason why every single map has a ramp in StarCraft. It's
Yeah.
because like if you're playing Terran, you will get fucked by like Zealots just getting into your face or Zerglings and everything. So that was actually very interesting actually, because I read an article about like, like the maps and obviously the map design in Co is very important because there are certain resources to distribute in certain areas. And obviously you have to make sure like, okay, well, both sides need to be somewhat equal. But then when I look at StarCraft, they're like, it's randomly generated, but they're like, but there's always a ramp. And I was like, holy shit, he's
To
right.
wall yourself in.
There's always a ramp for Terran. It's literally only for like Terran, so they don't
Basically. Yeah.
yeah. And I was like, holy crap, can you imagine having something like that in Company of Heroes? Like
And
it would oh
when you look at the timeline aspect of it, you will also notice that in Company of Heroes, as far as I know, resources or the resource capability of a region never runs out. You can take resources
Yeah,
indefinitely.
yeah.
And in StarCraft, it's not like that. There's a point
Yeah.
where a region is dried out and you
Mhm.
have to move on. But until then, you're just fine.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, like eventually you have to make that switch. But like I said, like I just like the pacing of it. Like I'm not interested in crossing my arms, watching my workers gather stuff for like 4 minutes while I occasionally pan my camera to look for like a the
Yeah.
recon unit.
Yeah.
It's just not my type of play. It's just, but you know, I can see the appeal though. I'm not gonna act like one system's flat out better than the other. It's just my personal preference. I prefer like the offensive and like just the offensive aggressive nature of like, okay, like we're gonna get into a fight immediately. Like just go into it. So yeah.
Since you both jumped around between pros and cons, let's go officially in that segment.
Mhm.
And we also touched the first one I have, the graphics. Saturn and I talked about this a few days ago when we played around again. It basically looks so much better compared to the sequels, to me at least, because it looks more realistic. The second and third one has more a comic style look, not in the extreme sense, but it's not that realistic
Yeah,
for me.
no,
And
I get what you mean 100% because when I play Co 3, right, my background is mainly from Co 1. There's obviously more Co 2 players who are active in Co 3. And also I do 3D like for video games. So I can it's not that the graphics are bad in Co 2 and Co 3. It's the way that they're presented. There's some like I'm watching your stream right now, and like if you zoom in the camera on this Pershing or like the M4 or even the rifles, like obviously if you zoom the camera in, you will see like holy crap, like just I could literally see the polygons. I can see where like the edges are literally cut. Uh but the thing is though, is realistically the camera is never going to be that close unless you were doing like the 2007 Machinima videos. From what I've noticed when I was doing a comparison in graphics, the vehicles in Code 2, they look better. The infantry, though, looks crap. Like, if you actually zoom in your camera on the infantry in Code 2, it looks extremely cartoonish. It looks like a THQ game for like a cartoon show. Like, it looks really bad. But the vehicles, though, are actually very impressive. For Code 3, the problem with Code 3 is, again, it's the shading. There's something very wrong with the lighting. The tone of the game is, I think, another issue for Co 3. When I look at Co 3, I think of like Kelly's Heroes. I think of like that non-serious 70s or like early 80s action movie where like you shoot someone and they go like, and then they hold on to their gunshot wound for like 5 seconds and then they fall to the ground like very stiff. Like I think of it as it's not as serious, and I guess that was a design decision. Like these are things you have to that you have to decide before the game starts being made because they will dictate your art style, like your cover box art. Like just look at the cover art of Co 3 and compare it to Co 2 and Co 1. Like Co 1 is straight up a ripoff from Saving Private Ryan. Co 2 is like Soviet, more like Enemy at the Gates. And then Co 3 is just like, what the hell is this? Like it looks like a 70s movie. Like it just it's weird. Like I feel like the serious tone of like World War II and like people dying, it went backwards. It's like movies now, like ever since Saving Private Ryan, have been very serious. But like meanwhile, for Company of Heroes, like I feel like the seriousness of like death and destruction went the opposite. It seems more as like a joke or like it's just not taken seriously. It's weird. But for Company of Heroes 1 though, I feel like the reason why the game looks more natural is because of the way the infantry works. I'm looking at your stream right now, and you'll actually notice there's the squads are really spread out. They move around more with the environment. But this actually, when you're looking at it from a competitive standpoint, the infantry moving around becomes a bad thing. I cannot stress enough the amount of times I've had a rifleman. It usually happens a lot with the riflemen because there's 6 guys. You'll have one guy that will jump out of cover and he's going to get the entire squad suppressed by a machine gun. Or sometimes you have Rangers with Thompsons or a lot of CQB units who, instead of just standing still and returning fire, they are going to jump around 24/7. And because they're jumping and they're stuck in like this animation of trying to dodge enemy fire, they're never shooting back. And so it affects a lot of close range fighting. So I can get the reason why it looks more natural, but I swear, sometimes when you're really playing competitively, there are engagements that are lost because your infantry, that like the squad AI is just kicking in. Like I'm looking at your stream right now, and chances are, like if you look at the riflemen, you'll see like sometimes they just run around for a super long time. Like the guy holding the Panzerschreck is probably not even going to shoot at the Tiger. Like look at that running. Look at, oh my God. He's running inside the ditch instead of firing. Like it's stuff like this that changes a lot of. Look, he's still running behind the Tiger. But overall, though, I feel like it's just the shading. That the shaders are really well done for this game, and if you apply a texture pack, it's just next level. It honestly feels like you are playing a different game entirely because you are getting a lot of detail. I usually tend to run historically accurate skins, and so I've had skin packs where you can literally see the swastika on like a eagle emblem on like a officer cap or even like on the tunic of a German soldier. Like just let that sink in. Like that is a tiny, tiny little detail that you can actually fully see when you zoom in the camera. Like it's insane. Like I think these textures are literally in 2K on a game from 2007. It's just absolutely bonkers to me to even think about that.
Maybe that's also really the problem for me, that I never felt in Company of Heroes 2 and 3 that the graphic made that insane nice jump we had in Company of Heroes 1 compared to Command and Conquer back in the days. It's, yeah, a different scale.
Yeah, it's and Code 2 also, at launch was it was not optimized. It still isn't well optimized to this day. At least Code 3 is extremely optimized, but again, like Code 3, just the problem with Code 3 is its presentation. Like the graphics are good. They are good. Like if you actually zoom in, the infantry models look amazing. Like some of them are not so amazing, but some of them are just straight on like 10 out of 10. Like it's excellent work. The problem is it's the way it's presented. There's a saying in the industry, you can have the best 3D artist and the best texture artist, but if you have someone who doesn't do the lighting properly or has someone that fucks up the parameters of your shaders, you will never see these details. And Co 3, unfortunately, is the perfect example of that. There's something very wrong with the shading and the way the lighting is presented because you are missing out on some really good details. I saw the art station of someone who made the characters for the Africa Corps faction and the United States. I don't know why, but some of his work like isn't in the final build, and I was very I was like, wow, I'm actually very surprised because these models, first off, they're actually historically accurate, and second of all, they look phenomenal. And like I didn't see a single one of his final models, but I think what they did, I think the way they set up their game though is I think they've actually made it so that you can tank, you could you can tank, you can take the pants from Model A and combine it with the torso of like Model B. So I think that's what they did because I'm realizing when I was looking at his art station, okay, that model isn't in the game, but I know those pants are in the game. That helmet and that face cover is in the game, but it's just not combined as one as an actual 3D model. But yeah, but Co 1 though, just honestly, it's more the fact that you have to understand this is a game from 2006 and it just holds up so well. It's just crazy to me. I don't know how they did it. I really don't. Like like maybe we're a little biased because we remember playing this game back in the day, but like I'm sorry, but I just feel like it even holds up extremely well even to some of the most recent RTS games. Actually, when I played StarCraft, I was like, wow, the graphics for this game are pretty fucking disappointing. I was like, oh, Jesus, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it was from 98, StarCraft 1 and StarCraft 2, 2010, so
Yeah.
a little
That's
bit
what I
around
mean.
that.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Um,
Like to StarCraft 2, when I picked it up, I was like, ugh, okay.
what I really find cool about it is the immersion of the game. Especially when I've played a few campaign missions, and at the very beginning, I found it really immersive how the game depicts the situation. It was really weird, especially I think the sound it adds to the immersion. I mean, the looks are, as you said, really cool, but hearing the machine gun or a lot of machine guns, hearing the bazooka, stuff like that, and
Yeah.
you have a real battlefield under your nose. We have seen a lot of games which show some sci-fi situations where you can emotionally and intellectually easily separate yourself from.
Yeah.
But when you look at this game here, you can't help but feel reality taking its toll on your mood. You
Oh, for
know
sure.
what is going on. You look at the situation, and you can in your guts really understand a whole lot more of what is going on in this very moment, and this game really catches it, I think.
Yeah, the audio is everything. Like Code One overall is it's a fantastic game. Like it not only is it fun, but like the art is good, the sound is good, the voice acting is good. It's by far some of the best voice acting I've ever heard. It's got the same voice actor, like the German announcer for Panzer Elite is like that German announcer in Red Orchestra. Like he's that famous. His name is Wolf something. He's a very famous German voice actor. But like the mood is there. When I'm playing as the Panzer Elite, which is historically based on the Panzer Lehr and like the Fallschirmjäger and I think the 10th SS that served in Operation Market Garden. Like when you play as them, your announcer is like, "Oh, we've eradicated the disease that is our enemy. Camp Contrôleur has proven its superiority once again." It's like, fuck, like it fits the theme, right? Like I'm based off like the SS. I'm supposed to be like the best of the best, or like Germany is supposed to be the best, and I have this announcer just reinforcing this stuff with his announcement. It
Yeah,
just feels
yeah.
amazing. Like even the lumbering Churchill has proven to be no match for our superior armor. I'm like, fuck, okay. Like this is what I'm talking about. Let's go. It's
What what
perfect.
what I would be interested in, because I'm really not a history buff, or at least not in that detail, how often the game balancing actually clashed with real world properties of things, of units, of things in general. How many times did they have to actually
Uh,
do compromises because they thought if you do it like in reality, well, the gameplay will suck.
Honestly, the in terms of the balancing, like in terms of IRL balancing, it's actually not that bad. Like obviously, like I was mentioning earlier, if you have a knowledge of World War II, you play this game, you kind of have an idea of what to expect. I know a Thompson is an SMG. If I get the drop on this Gren squad that only has bolt action rifles, I'm expected to win. Meanwhile, if I can't close the gap with my Thompsons and I'm just sitting in green cover at max range, I'm gonna deal no damage, and the bolt actions or like the G43 semi-automatic rifle will force me away. Then you have stuff like the BAR, which is straight up like a damage, but a damage increase at every range. Same thing with like the FG42. In terms of the vehicles, though, it's actually pretty well done. The only thing I will say at the competitive level, Wehrmacht have the Stugs, and in this game, they are so fucking annoying. Excuse my language here, but like it's one of the reasons I stopped playing the game like competitively as well. I was just so tired of playing as USA against like multiple Stugs because in this game they have insane armor. It's more difficult to deal with like three Stugs in Co 1 than it is to deal with like a Tiger. Because Stugs with veterancy, they gain armored skirts, which increases their armor. They also get access to a machine gunner. And for some reason, the machine gunner on the Stu 42 and the Stug is bugged in this game, and they actually will start suppressing riflemen after a few bursts. But meanwhile, all the other MG gunners, like for the Sherman and the Panzer IV and the Panther and the King Tiger, they only add DPS. They don't actually start suppressing infantry. So what
Mhm.
you have is there's no reason to make anything else as Axis, but like Stugs. And then meanwhile, Panzer Elite have the Hetzer, which has obscene frontal armor. Like, dude, my AT guns are bouncing on the front of these tanks. And it gets to a point where, again, I feel like the game is just. I can't, there's no room for me to really expand as a better player because it comes down to moments of pure RNG where, like, I'll get the drop on a Stug. like I'm firing on the side of a Stug, but there's no side armor in Code 1 or Code 2. It's a thing in Code 3, but like there's no side armor in Code 1. So what the game does is if I get shot from the side, there's a formula that comes in, and it's like a 50-50 chance that it counts as a rear hit or a
Okay.
frontal hit. So it's like, well, apart like the Stugs and the Hetzers, they're the only real exception. But everything else though is fairly accurate. Like Sherman versus Panzer IV is kind of RNG-ish. You know, these are tanks that sometimes pan and sometimes bounce. Pershing versus Tiger will come down to the veterancy. But overall, the game is fairly accurate. Like usually you have to take into consideration the cost. But like I would say the kind of matchups that are kind of wobbly would probably be like the Panzer IV versus the Sherman versus the Cromwell. Like those can be kind of a toss-up. But again, like there's the veterancy that comes into play. But overall, no, the vehicle balancing is pretty solid. I think it's one of the best parts. For the only exception of the Stugs and the Hetzers, that's honestly more of an issue when you're playing as USA. But for the other factions, it's not so much of an issue. Like there isn't really a vehicle that stands out, and you're like, wow, like this unit is just not historically accurate because it's bouncing everything or absorbing or so forth. Oh, it's pretty well done.
What also is very well done, I would say, maybe with one exception, the group management. It's rarely that you can have a big group and select only one unit to go to this direction, and you still have more or less selected the group, which breaks sadly when you retreat them. You have the entire group selected, and you would like to reinforce the entire group you have, and you have to click on every single fucking squad to reinforce it.
Yeah, that's just one of the things. Like again, since it's an old game, it's missing a lot of the quality of life stuff. Like there's no auto reverse key for vehicles. There's no auto reinforce, which is something I've come to really enjoy from Co 3. Like not having to micromanage that, even though it was a big skill. Like, here's the thing. I can see like I like how the game has like I like how Co 2 and Co 3 have an auto reverse key for like vehicles, but it was actually a big skill thing in Co 1. There was a lot.
This is kind of what drives up your actions per minute, because
Yeah.
you have to take care of all of this in detail, and this is what I mean. This has very little to do with actual strategy.
Yeah,
It's
more of
basically
like
tactics.
Yeah. But that's kind of the thing. That's why I like, when I'm playing as Panzer Elite, like whenever people would play against me, they would be like, "Wow, like your APM or your CPM was like 97." They're like, "What the fuck?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, dude. Like I have to micromanage all of these light vehicles. If I have to back up, I can't just open the tactical map and right click my base. I have to hold shift and spam right click multiple times, doing this with multiple vehicles. It's actually insane." And then, and I don't even use control groups too. I just use the tactical map because the tactical map in Co 1 is so crystal clear compared to Co 2 and Co 3 that I can just open the tactical map and quickly look at it and be like, oh shit, like I need to switch my camera to this location because this vehicle has an AT gun in front of it, like that's about to fire. So I just open the tactical map, double click there, and then start giving shift commands. When I was streaming Co 3, I had some players comment. They're like, "Dude, how can you play this game with no control groups?" I'm like, "Dude, to be honest, it's because of Co 1. Like when I played Co 1, I opened the tactical map and I would look for my units and give commands from there. And in Co 3, the tactical map in Co 3 was awful. The last update that came out this Wednesday actually made changes where the icons are now smaller. So it's very similar to Co 1, and that has ironically made me a much better player. Like I could immediately tell when I was playing Co 3 in the last 3 days that I was like, wow, like holy shit, I'm not actually like losing my matches in the mid to late game because the tactical map isn't filled with these gigantic icons. It still has improvement. It still needs more improvement, but yeah, it's just one of those things. Like just the lack of quality of life. It makes it very difficult for someone who's probably played a game like Co 2 and Co 3 to give that game a shot. You'd probably be like, ugh, no, I'm not touching this. It's too much of a hassle. And it kind of is. It really is. Like it's very like I said, like it's hard for me to come back to a game like Co 1 where I play Co 3 and I don't have like that squad jumping. I don't have to manually reinforce manually, do all these things. It's I used to see it more as like a skill ceiling thing, but now I just see it more as a hassle. Like I feel like I'm fighting against the game, so it's not as enjoyable anymore. It's weird. It's very weird how you could quickly like praise something and then you play it back and it's like, ugh.
Hmm. Yeah. What I like about the game, I already said, the Ashes of the Singularity also uses it, is this region concept. You have it in other games too, where resources are really scattered around the map, what we just discussed earlier.
Mhm.
And I find it important that an entire region actually is kind of under your control. In other games, you have certain resource spots, and basically you don't have to defend this specific spot, and that's about it. But actually, you get the control over an entire region, and we could probably even expand on that. But the idea I find important, that you can say, okay, it is not enough to have resources in a certain location and go about the game, and that's it. But you really have to take regions, and the game is basically only won when you have gotten through to the opponent. One question I have about this, I'm not quite sure if this is the case here too. Do I have to have an adjacent region to actually gain resources? I give you an
Yeah, the
example
way
what I mean. You
yeah,
have to have a straight path there somehow.
yeah, it needs to connect to your base. It has
Okay,
to. You can't
because
be like you can't just be like, for example, you like let's say there's a fuel in the top left corner of the map and your base is in the bottom left. You
yeah,
can't just run to
yeah,
that
yeah,
fuel in the corner and capture it in the first like 30 seconds and be like, oh, now I'm getting plus 10 fuel. It's like, no, buddy, you gotta
yeah, yeah.
capture. It's gotta be a line. It has to physically connect to your base. And this
And
is where cutoffs come into play and everything.
yeah, and
This is
this
more
makes
of
it
them.
important to play the map. This is what I
Yeah,
was getting at. Because
yeah.
in other games, it is enough to drive the person away from the resources and exploit them yourselves. But in this game, it isn't enough. You really have to actually have control over this region. It doesn't suffice to just kick the people out there who are in there. You have to have a connection to it, and you have to hold it. And the only thing you can do behind the lines is get someone out of there and reducing their gain, but that's
hmm
about it. You won't profit anymore from the situation. You only take it away from someone, but that's about
hmm
it.
Yeah, this is more of like a per map thing. Like you'll have some maps that have a very strong emphasis on cutoffs, and then you have other maps that just simply don't even have them.
Hmm.
Like Angoville is notorious for its cutoffs. Like you literally have to defend your cutoff like 90% of the time when you're playing against like Axis because they're always going to try to set up an MG on it.
And it can make the game actually really interesting because even when you are really far progressed, if someone slips behind the lines, takes you
Well,
off
yeah,
guard, it can destroy half of your economy just because you didn't pay attention enough of it. While in other games, well, okay, you have destroyed my nexus here, bad, but I have 5 others, I don't care.
yeah,
No,
it's
those
manageable.
4 others are useless because you don't have any connection anymore.
Yeah, in some games it's downright GG. Like I said on
Yeah.
Angleville, if Wehrmacht gets to, 1 MG on your cutoff, that's all they need to take. Like that's all they need to hold on to because I don't know if you guys remember Angleville, but it's that one with that massive road in the middle and there's a bunch of hedgerows and literally you just cross, it's a map you just diagonally cross like about 10 meters and you are and like your opponent's cutoff is right there. And like it's a lot of the 1v1 maps have like a big emphasis on these cutoffs, and naturally as allies you tend to try to defend these a bit more because usually the Germans are going to try to make a push onto them because they're very easy to lock down. Like if you're playing as Panzer Elite, you just put your entire army on that cutoff and camp it, and meanwhile as Ver, like you send most of your army to it and then you get the cutoff and then you have like a pioneer that starts to decap everything slowly so that those resources can become his. Yeah, definitely. It's a huge thing, but that's really more of like again, that's why map making has a huge role on like balancing. Some people think there's a saying like some people in the Code 3 and Code 2 community are like, oh, maps dictate the balancing, and then some people say, well, no, the balancing dictate the maps. I think honestly, from a game design perspective, I think the best case scenario is I think all the maps should be symmetrical. Like, honestly, if I were to release a game in like 2 years from now, I would tell my map maker, listen, we're gonna make maps, but the thing is, just to make it simple for like game designers and for balancing down the line, make the maps a mirror image of themselves. Like just make it mirrored. It's gonna be a bit boring, but at least it'll give us an idea. Okay, like it could give us a pointer as to okay, what are like okay, how is this faction struggling? Why does this faction struggle on this map? Why does it struggle more on this map? And then you could see, well, if both sides are literally mirrored, if you have the same house over here and the same house over here, you can't really say, well, it's because I got North Spawn. It's like, well, no, like, shut up. Like, North Spawn is literally the same thing. You have a piece of green cover here, you have the same piece of green cover over here. It's a little mirrored version of itself. And I would think I would even take it so far. I would take it even a step further. I'd make it have one side of the map that's more close quarter oriented and have one side that's more long range oriented. Because if you have a map that's just long range open ground, the faction that has the better long range units, aka Axis, that's usually how it goes in every single game. This is like their spot to shine. And meanwhile, if you have CQB maps, this tends to generally favor allies. Like they have like Thompsons, PPSH, you name it.
Yeah.
Like these, like obviously, if you compare the rate of fire of these two guns in real life, it's a hell of a lot faster compared to an MP40. It's definitely faster than a Sturmgewehr. So naturally, these two weapon profiles are going to dominate. And then obviously, if you have like M1 Grands, M1 Carbines going up against Kar 98K Mausers, well, yeah, like obviously this is going to be more of an allied map. And it's kind of the reason why in Code 2, a lot of the CQB maps got completely gutted. Because if you add the Truesight mechanic, which is what we talked about earlier, where if I'm standing in front of a house, I have no idea what's on the corner. So if you can imagine from the German player's perspective, he's got a 4-man Grand Squad with Kar 98Ks, and he turns the corner and he runs into like a guard squad with like DP28. It's just it's not.
He can't play his advantage actually.
Yeah, exactly. It's actually one of the reasons why Samoa, which was a 1v1 map in Code 1, it was called Samoyski in Code 2. It was eventually removed from the auto-match pool because everyone was like, this map is just disgusting to play on. I have no idea what's happening in the middle because it's filled with garrisons. I cannot see where my opponent is at, and it's just not fun to play as because if I'm playing as Axis, it's not a question of me misplaying. It's more of a question I have to like take a risk of peeking the corner, and if I run into a CQB unit, I'm just instantly fucked. Like just instantly, I'm screwed. I have to go back to base now. Like I just know turning the corner, there's a CQB unit. I'm instantly gonna lose the fight. Like I'll lose a model because the time to kill in that game is a lot lower. If you make one mistake, like if you're not in green cover in that game, you're gonna lose a model like instantly. Whereas Code 1 is a lot more forgiving. Well, that's a whole other topic in itself, though.
You talked a lot about maps. What I really find, especially in this game, is that you have this amazing cover and building system where you can basically really play the map, as Saturn mentioned. You have to adapt even to bomb craters. You have to, or not you have to, you can basically cut down trees and make your own paths.
There's a lot of interesting stuff.
Or if a tank just leveled an area while all your cover is gone.
Yeah.
Definitely that, or what also is amazing that you always have to be prepared that it's completely changing. You can't say it's the same match as the 5 matches before. The map layout changes a little bit every time to the different, random events.
Oh yeah, some maps. Listen, if you're playing on a map like Langres, like that's the beauty of Code 1. I think it's by far the best thing about the game. It's the way that the factions are designed. They are so different from each other, and so the way that you play as them and the way you play versus them changes so much. And also the map pool comes into play. Like there's some maps that are just unplayable for some factions, so those are the ones that you veto. And then there's some maps that are just super overpowered for some factions, by far. Like it's a big thing. Like garrisons, right? Like garrisons have been a very hot topic. Like it was one of the big critiques about Company of Heroes 3, the whole height mechanic. It's like, dude, we know that houses are really strong in Company of Heroes because they give you like a better version of green cover. So now if you have a height mechanic involved, you guys remember the height mechanic, if I'm pushing into an opponent who has a height mechanic over me, he ignores my cover. So let's say I have this massive brick mansion with like 10 windows inside, and there's two like squads inside of them. And let's say at the base of the mansion there's a green wall of green cover. Well, I can kind of take the fight because there's a wall there. I have a short brick wall of green cover, right? Like it could be like part of like the garden of the mansion. So I have cover for my infantry to shoot at the garrison. The problem is though the height mechanic in Co 3 makes it so that if the player is in an elevated position, aka the windows of the mansion, he's ignoring the cover. So I'm taking full on damage. So a lot of players were like, why the fuck is this even a mechanic? Is Relic stupid? Oh my god, are they retarded? Like, why is this in the game? Well, I can understand the frustration, but I think that's Relic just trying to innovate because, like, we can't. I kind of understand what they're trying to do. Like, they can't remake like a code 2.0 or like a code 1 2.0. Like they have to find something that kind of makes it unique. So they went with the height mechanic, and I think most of us are slowly starting to get used to it. But yeah, garrisons have always been like a big part of co. And obviously for maps, they're going to play a huge part. Like there's some areas of the maps where you just rush to this area and get the house because like it gives you an early game lead. It also gives you extra vision. Like that is something I use a lot when I play as US. Like I'll sometimes just get inside a random garrison just to see if I can catch an MG like out of position or if I could see if it's flankable or not. But yeah, like by far, like again, this is one of the things that like how can I say, if I were a game dev, these are things that I would really try to advertise because I've seen the trailers for like Company of Heroes 1 and 2, and I'm like, this kind of like it's kind of cringe. Like it's not really giving me any information as to what the game is. It kind of seems like a shitty like indie game trailer. It's like I'm not getting information as to what the game is about, like what are the mechanics or anything like that. But like really the terrain destruction in Co 1 to me, that I was really blown away from it because again, like I mentioned earlier, Battlefield was always advertising their terrain destruction. But meanwhile in this game, I could literally like I could do anything. I can call in an artillery strike and it's gonna create cover for me. I could blow up a hedgerow with like a Goliath. I can destroy a bridge with like artillery and demo charges. I can bring down a building. I was like, holy shit, dude, this is insane. And also like you can have small arms fire that will occasionally destroy fences and stuff. I was like, holy crap, dude, like the last Brothers in Arms, Hell's Highway that came out on the Xbox and PC, they were advertising this sort of technology in their first-person shooter. Like, oh, look, if you spray a Thompson with, if you spray a little fence with a Thompson, you can destroy it. And I'm like, dude, like, is this really like that innovative? Like, they had this in Company of Heroes. Like, every time I would see a company advertise their destructive environments, I'd be like, well, I've already seen this in an RTS. But like, meanwhile, Relic never advertised that. It was very bizarre to me. Very, very bizarre. So yeah, like the maps, they're a big part of the game, but it's always been a difficult thing from Relic to make actual like properly balanced maps. They make some really cool looking maps, but it could be but like I said, sometimes they can be extremely unbalanced, like borderline unplayable. Wreck Train is probably the best example of a unplayable Co-1 map, at least for USA, because like two MGs just lock down the entire thing.
But what is interesting for me, at least as a professional noob player here, I always had the feeling that in Company of Heroes you had at least the chance to turn the table, the tide really around. It's in most RTS games you have the problem if you have really old resources all the time in the world, the other players are fucked. You don't have any chance. Here, if the opponent makes a few mistakes, even in the late game, maybe I can still turn it around. And this is rare, I think.
Absolutely. No, it's definitely doable. It's just on some maps it's more notoriously bad. And I think the best example would probably be like USA versus Ver. Because naturally, if the US player like misplays, like let's say he's always getting caught into the MGs and he has to retreat back to base, well, eventually what happens is like that 50-50% map control slowly decreases. And those MGs are getting closer and closer to the outside of your base, which is why like Langris, for example, is probably a good example. Like Langris is actually playable, but if the MGs like get to your cutoffs and get to the outside of your base, like it's pretty much GG. Wreck Train is a good example. Wreck Train is, I think, literally unplayable because the map is literally separated into two sides. Like you have a left side outside, you have like an exit on the left side of your base and an exit on the right side of your base. And if you want to go to the middle, it's basically like you kind of have four exits out of your base. You got two on the left and two on the right. The one on the far right allows you to go over to like the right corner of the map. The one on the far left kind of leads you to the far left side of the map. Meanwhile, the one that's in the middle left and middle right, they kind of lead to the middle. But that entire middle can like just be I put one machine gun and it covers the far right and the left side exit. I could put an MG that covers the right side and the far right side. And it's like this is like relatively available in the first like 2 minutes of the game. And then also you have the opportunity to lay down wire and tank traps. You can literally lock down an entire map in a matter of minutes. And one of my balance ticks was like, I really dislike how Volksgrenadiers have access to wire because it literally makes it so that if the US player does one mistake, he can literally get base pins in the first 3 minutes of the game because the Volksgrenadiers can wire off parts of the map, the Pioneers can wire off parts of the map. It's just infuriating to play against. So, but definitely out of all the other RTS games, like there's a reason why like when you watch stuff like StarCraft, right? You watch StarCraft 2 tournaments and you'll have like one little fight that go like this is what I mean. You have players like this is why I don't like Age of Empires and StarCraft because you have players who are building up all these resources. They start making these army compositions, but the army compositions aren't moving out of base, right? You kind of want to reach like that critical mass and look for the moment for like that big fight, and the big fight takes place. And then like the pro players just know from the losses they took or from the casualties they inflicted that it's game over for one side. That's kind of true in Co, at least at the competitive level, but there's always that opportunity of making a comeback because the game has RNG, right? Like who knows? I might be able to like get a lucky wipe if I just all in my armored car and like try to look for like a fast kill. Who knows? My opponent could run into like my minefield here. Like I have no chance of killing like this heavy tank, but if that heavy tank hits that 25 ammo mine that I just planted, and I have two AT guns in position to like start bombarding him when he gets snared, all of a sudden I might be able to turn this game around. Like there is room for comebacks. That's definitely true. And I think that's one thing I've never really thought of. But now that you pointed it out, that's actually a big thing. Because if I compare it to StarCraft, I've seen a lot of players just instantly like surrender their game when they're playing StarCraft because they just know like, oh, I can't win this now, based on the losses. But in tournaments, at least in Co 1 and Co 2 and even Co 3, you have players that fight it out literally to the last VP. Like they will not give up because the game, like you said, it actually makes it possible. I actually never really thought about that. Now that you brought that up, actually, I was like, wait, he's right. It actually makes sense.
Another thing which is really special and unique even is how the game treats DLCs in general, or back then it was called expansions. Opposing Front, for example, added two factions, the British and the Panzerleiter. And if you just bought the Opposing Front expansion, you could play those two factions, but didn't have access to the other two original factions. So it was very special there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you had the base game was just Company of Heroes. It was USA and Ver. And then the first expansion, that's the one I got. So that's when I started playing the game. It was Opposing Fronts. Opposing Fronts was Panzer Elite and British. And then after that, there was a last expansion. That was called Tales of Valor. And what Tales of Valor was, this was actually very interesting because if you did not have Co 1, if you didn't have just basic Co and Opposing Fronts, and you went ahead and bought Tales of Valor, you got access to actually all four factions, but you missed out on the campaigns. You didn't have the Normandy campaign for US, you didn't have the Liberation of Caen campaign for the Brits, and you didn't have the Operation Market Garden campaign for Panzer Elite. But you had the three mini campaigns that Tales of Valor gave you, which was like the German defense, the Tiger campaign, and then you had the like the small Normandy campaign with like the airborne troops or whatever. But you also had access to 3 different game modes. You had Stonewall, the Stonewall operation, the Assault one, and you had the Panzerkrieg operation as well. And like Tales of Valor was like $30. It was not expensive. It was like $30 back then, I think. And I was actually very surprised by the content you got. I was like, wow, $30, you get the full multiplayer experience. Plus you get the if you bought Tales of Valor, it gave you extra units for your army. You had like the Hellcat, all those custom units.
Yeah, but you had to swap them. You couldn't
Yeah,
use all of them. You had to sacrifice other units for that.
yeah. I thought that was pretty cool. I was like actually very surprised that it was $30. It was not that expensive, I remember. I think it was 30 or $40 Canadian back in the day.
What they also really done very well is the factions itself. Every faction is completely different to the others. No faction is the same. I really like this in an RTS game.
That's actually one of my biggest things that I really praise about this game. When I played Code 2, kind of slowly realized I was like, dude, I'm always playing the same thing in Code 2. I'm always making the same units and I'm always playing against the same crap, regardless of the faction I play and regardless of the faction I'm playing against. Eventually, with Code 2's life cycle, there was a few there were a few like community balance patches, and these are patches basically kind of encouraged or suggested by community members who play the game. So it's like if I got recruited into like a balanced community for Code 1, like I would be one of the first ones to be like, we need to nerf the Stug armor because it's ludicrous. It's bouncing too many times like on my tanks. So what happened was there were a few changes that took place for Code 2, and eventually for the meta, the way that the game was played out, like you always did the same thing. It was 3 or 4 main lines, 1 to 2 engineers, 1 light vehicle if you were ahead. If you were behind, you'd get like 2 AT guns, and then you would always make medium tanks. So if you're playing as like the Soviets, you had 4 conscripts, a Maxim, or like a Dishka, and then you probably threw in like a bunch of T-34 85s. It was the same thing though. It didn't matter what the hell you were playing. The only exception was probably USA, but it got to a point at the competitive play because of the way the game was designed. The game was very campy. Like the game is campy by default because the time to kill is lower. And so the faction design, the unit roster was just the same thing. Like I watched so many of the Master League hosted by AE, and I started realizing like, dude, it doesn't matter if you're playing as Ver or Soviets. You're literally fielding the same army composition. It's just not interesting. It's kind of like a mirror match. It's like, oh, look, this is his main line playing against his main line. But meanwhile, when you watch Code 1, it's completely different. There's like it's so rare to see a Sherman from USA, and like Ver will make Stugs, which is annoying to play against, but it's different. It's not the same as a Panzer Elite player who's got like a bunch of half tracks or a bunch of light armored cars and like good infantry running around. It's just super different. Meanwhile, you have like the typical Brit blob or the Brit Sim City, vastly different. Does it mean it's enjoyable? No, but it makes for a different experience. And sometimes you get the occasional random player that will just make something completely odd, and you're like, damn, okay, I did not expect this at all. So yeah, that's it's definitely the best thing about the game, 100%. Like, yes, the game's dated. Is it balanced? Hell no. But it's a different experience, man. It's not the same thing at all. Uh, Even though there's 4 factions, the fact that the 4 factions are varied enough, it means you have to adjust your playstyle. Like, USA versus Ver, you're supposed to be looking for flanks, getting these, you're supposed to be flanking machine guns, kind of looking for fights. Like, you want to isolate the German player. But then if you're playing against Panzer Elite, you're kind of advised not to engage at all. You just want to be harassing the map and stuff like that. It's a completely different mindset, completely different. So, yeah, it's definitely my favorite part of the game. I still think it's the best in all the series. I mean, Co 3 kind of did something similar, but Co 1's though is definitely the most interesting. But apart from Brits is not interesting. That's
The camper faction.
yeah, the blobbing faction. Ugh.
But what Company of Heroes is really missing compared to Company of Heroes 2 is the thousands of DLCs you can buy. It's unbelievable what you can buy in Company of Heroes 2, and I hate it. I really hate it.
You hate the DLC or you hate the fact that there's more commanders?
I hate the you can buy so much.
Yeah, it's kind of ludicrous.
If it's a bundle like an expansion, if you have to pay $20-$30. Okay, but having hundreds of bundles where you don't even know what is the bundle doing, oh come on.
Yeah, honest, but the thing is, back in the day, that was a valid argument for Code 2. But now that you gain like these points that you can use to kind of buy like the entire game. Like you can literally back then there was a time where if you wanted a commander, you had to randomly get them from drops. Same thing with skins. You got them randomly through drops. And then eventually, what they added was these points that you would randomly get. And then, if you got enough points acquired, you can actually go in and straight up get like the skins that you wanted or the commanders you wanted. So at launch or back in the day, there was a merit to make the game like pay to win, definitely 100%. But had now, however, I feel like that argument doesn't hold up. And besides, most of the commanders that you get for free are the best ones. At least like in a try-hard, sweaty meta. Like you don't really want the additional ones. And a lot of the other commanders, they recycle a lot of stuff. And that was actually another thing I didn't like so much about Code 2. I didn't like how there wasn't any decision making in what you unlocked. You unlocked everything in a linear path. So there was no like opportunity cost, you know. If I'm rushing like the left side of my commander tree in Code 1, I'm clearly missing out on the stuff on the right side. But in Code 2, there's none of that. Code 2 actually lacks a lot of decision making, which is one of the things I didn't like so much about it. But fundamentally, I just didn't like the gameplay. It became very, very defensive and very campy as the game went on, and it just got boring real quick. But the commanders, though, they're not too bad. It's just one thing I never liked about the commanders in Code 2, a lot of them didn't have any themes. It was kind of like they just took ideas and just bashed them all up together. And I think the Soviets and Ver is a good example of that because there's a lot of commanders in there that recycle the same gibberish. I think there's like 5 commanders for Ver now that give them like a tiger. There's a lot of abilities too that are just downright awful that like no one gives a shit about, so no one really goes for them. But yeah, that's again another topic.
One thing we should also quickly touch is that one of the pros of this title is it has mod support compared to Company of Heroes 2. And yeah, there is limited in 3, but in general.
Oh, in 3, it's not even existent to be honest. It's like
yeah, mods are very important for me, so it's a big pro here.
Yeah. Honestly, there was a time where I kind of abandoned the competitive scene in Code 1. This was at the time where Tales of Valor came out, those extra units that you could swap out. It made the game virtually unplayable. Like the British Kangaroo Carrier was a massive problem in team games. This was like a transport vehicle that had as much HP as like a medium tank, and it could also crush infantry. It was just a painful experience. Basically, a lot of the new units were completely busted, and the balance was like that for almost 6 months. It was, in my opinion, that was the patch or the content that really killed off the game, because a lot of the competitive players just simply went away and just didn't bother playing the game. There was actually a time where actually Eastern Front mod was actually used once to host a tournament because they actually quickly went into their mod and nerfed the things that were broken. So like they reduced the HP on the Kangaroo Carrier so that it wouldn't have as much HP as a medium tank. Like it didn't make any sense. Why does this carrier have so much HP? Like it would take so many AT guns to kill these things. It was ludicrous. And so there was actually one mod that was hosted on that tournament. Like even though they had Soviets in the game, the Austere wasn't a thing back then. You could still play the original factions, and they actually went in and quickly like hot fixed. Like okay, they fixed the M10 misfire bug, which is still not fixed in the game, and they made some quick balance adjustments to the patch when it hit. But that was where mods really took off. That's actually where I was like, okay, fuck this game. Like the balancing is off, and I'm kind of bored of playing Calm Stomps. If I'm gonna play a Calm Stomp, I'd rather play something new, and that's where I discovered Blitzkrieg mod, Eastern Front mod. I really played with Blitzkrieg though. Blitzkrieg, I was really impressed with the amount of units. Eastern Front mod, like it was cool to play against the Soviets, but it was like it's kind of the same thing I know how to beat the AI. It's not challenging. And if I want to play multiplayer, the game was not balanced at all for multiplayer for Eastern Front, so I didn't really bother. So I was like, you know what? Blitzkrieg mod is very different. It's very real. Like it was in parentheses, it was more of a realistic mod, but it's the type of game where like if a tiger shoots a Sherman, the Sherman's getting one-shotted, or it's like 2 shots to kill tanks. So it's extremely campy because like if you get caught off once by like an AT gun, you're gonna lose your light vehicle instantly. But it was different. So I gave it a try and like I eventually tried to like play it competitively. It was pretty cancerous, to say the least. But I gave it a shot. But to me, that was really more of like my if I wanted to play a comp stomp and just relax and like have a drink or something, or like I had a 5 to 9, come back from work or from school and I just really want to relax and not like try hard, that was actually my go-to mod. And honestly, that's where mods really became popular for Co 1. There was the Star Wars mod, the Modern Combat mod. There was also Europe at War, Europe in Ruins. That's really where mods took off, and I really think what happened was the remaining Co 1 community started really to fracture up. You had the community, you had the competitive aspect that was kind of like non-existent for a while, and then you basically had the skirmish like single player community that really fractured itself into like all these mods. And then obviously for like just the basic match multiplayer, it got fractured up into these mods again. Like even up to this day, like Co1 says it has 1,000 players playing the game, but like it doesn't have really 1,000 players playing the base game. It probably has like 200, even less. It's just the thing is, all of these guys are playing like skirmishes or they're playing mods, which I don't blame them. Like the mods are fantastic in that game. You could do so many things. It's crazy. But yeah, definitely, it's the best part about the series. You can actually go in into what do you call it? It's not Maya. What is it? The 3D program? I forget what the other one is called. 3ds Max. I think if you use like 2008 3ds Max, you can actually make your own 3D models and import them into the engine and animate them. But you can't do that in Code 2 and Code 3. And I reckon the reason why is it comes down to the DLC. If I allow players to make mods and they can bring in their own custom models, why would Johnny and Billy and Bobby go ahead and spend $2 or $3 on these new commanders, which have these brand new units, right? Like if you're playing against AI and playing against like computers, and you're not playing the multiplayer, there's absolutely no reason to get these units at all because I can play a mod that Joey made and he has all the units from the Second World War in there and it doesn't cost me a penny. So I reckon that's why they don't have proper mod support in these games. They claim they'll have it, but I'm calling bullshit on that because it's Sega. Sega tends to be really greedy with these things. I don't think Co 3 will ever have the proper mod support that it was advertised to have. I think it's going to be very limited like Co 2, where you can't bring in any custom 3D models because, like you said, you got to follow the money.
Definitely. One thing that bothers me, but this is actually something we already scratched, is the sheer amount of things you can know. I mean, this is normal for an RTS, as we discussed, but for a noob, again, it's you really have to invest time to have even a
Yeah.
remote chance to be getting a decent player. It's enough
Mhm.
to that you have to invest in time and just playing. It doesn't really necessarily mean playing competitively, but just seeing which units have which properties, how you have to react to them, how you can counter them. The normal RTS problem, but for a noob like me, it's just a real lot to take in.
Oh, it is. It's a shit ton of info to take in. I think Code 1, like I said earlier, compared to Code 2 and Code 3, it has the most info to take in because, like I said, you don't just have like one infantry type. You have like there's elite armor. Like this unit may have less HP, but it has a different armor value. So that means that
Yeah.
it'll take less damage from like this type of small arms fire, but they'll take more damage to flamers, for example. It's a lot of information like that that just isn't clear at all. You're like, what the hell does this even mean? Like, what the hell? Like, like
And it,
why are my rifles now losing when I'm in green cover? It's like,
exactly.
like,
This big question mark, as you just described it. Why am I losing here? What's going
yeah.
on? And as you say, it's not exactly obvious. But even if it were, the sheer amount of units and properties that you can add to these units, like buy the heavy ordnance stuff.
Yeah,
It's just a whole lot
sometimes.
of options.
Yeah, sometimes too, like sometimes you have players that are like, oh, this faction is trash, or this faction's OP, this one is this unit's OP. And then you're like, okay, and then usually like there's kind of like an inside joke with like the Code 2 and Code 3 community. It's like, all right, if you have these hot takes, we call them hot takes, like, okay, what the hell? Like this is a bold statement you're making. Usually most players will be like, show me your player card. Like I need to see your stats because if you've got shitty stats, right? Naturally, we're like, okay, well, you have a shitty understanding of how the game works because you're losing quite often. And it's like, well, dude, like, sorry, but like, sometimes skillful players will just see opportunities differently to weaker players, and we just have more game knowledge. We're able to, like, we have this bank of knowledge in our mind. It's like I'll
Yeah.
always know these things. Like, I have the muscle memory. There was one time I didn't play Co 1 for like 2 years, and I came back to it right when I started streaming for the first time on Twitch, and I was like, dude, I have this shit, like it's back. I played one game and I'm like, all right, I already remember exactly what to do. There's a whole bunch of stats too, like what was the cover, what was the veterancy, like how did you approach the fight? It's like, well, I lost, I have a Knight's Crossholder, but I'm losing to a Rifleman. It's like, well, brother, that Rifleman is Vet 3. Like they
Yeah.
get like 50% more damage at Vet 3.
This is already this very, very deep understanding of the game
Mhm.
mechanics itself, but already the options alone, like what kind of level, or what was it called, the doctrines.
Yeah.
You have to know about all the consequences of those very basic decisions, and it's
Yeah, they're big
already a whole lot.
decisions. Oh yeah, big decisions. Even at the top level play, sometimes you'll have players like they're fighting against like Grens, and some players like top level players, they'll be like, huh, okay, I know my opponent wins Zeal, and it's like, how do you know? It's like, well, he's winning fights that he shouldn't be winning, because Zeal, the way it works is if you take casualties, the more
Yeah.
casualties you take, the more effective your troops are in combat, and the guy who was playing it was Zulu, who was like I think the best USA player like 2 years ago when we were playing the game. And I was watching him stream. He's like, okay, I already know this guy went Terror. He's got Zeal because his Grins are winning fights that they should not be winning. And I was like, Jesus Christ, man. Like, even I didn't even notice that. But I was like, the more I thought about that statement, I was like, fuck, he's right. Yeah, this guy went Terror. And he was right too. The guy actually ended up getting a Tiger later on in the game. I was like, he got a King Tiger. I was like, holy shit. Okay, I didn't even pick up on that. And I was like, fuck, man. Okay, well played. Like, Jesus. There's a lot of stuff, man. Like, like Ver players using for the Fatherland, that gives them insane defensive stats. So effectively, you can't really push into that because it's available really early. We call it the get out of jail free card for Ver. It's insanely busted. It's a whole bunch of stuff, Like the whole concept of bleeding manpower. I remember at
Yeah.
one point I had a guy like who came into my Twitch chat and he told me, "Could you like cast my replay? Like I don't know what I'm doing wrong." And like it took me like, not even 2 minutes. I was like, "Oh brother, like where do I begin?" I was
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
but like these are things that like they're natural. I could understand why a newer player wouldn't understand like the mistakes he's making, but it's like once you lay it out to them, it's like, holy shit, like that's all I had to do. I'm like, yeah, dude, like you're taking this fight, but like you're playing against Panzer Elite. If you're playing against Ver, like this shit could work. But the thing is, when you're playing against Panzer Elite, right? Every single kill that you give them, you're not just bleeding manpower, you're actually giving him veterancy. If you're playing against Ver, that's not the case because Ver has to buy their vet. So it's not as bad. But if you're playing against Panzer Elite, if you're taking losses, you're bleeding manpower, but you're also making your opponent stronger because
Yeah.
he's going to get the veterancy requirement. So it's twice as bad. And he's like, fuck, I didn't think about that. I'm like, yeah, dude, like you have to.
It's similar to when you have those all total annihilation variations. When you destroy an enemy unit, it leaves a wreckage. It leaves metal. It's
Yeah.
when you
Mhm.
gather that, it enforces your economy, and in a very similar fashion. It's not just losing units; it's also giving the other guy even more resources.
Yeah, that's why. Like on stream, even when I was watching other high-level Code 1 streamers, I was like, I find it so funny how you guys don't have this instant, this like, I never understood. Like, I was the only one who would do this. Every time I would see a vehicle wreck from Axis, whether I was playing against PE or Ver, I would always destroy them because I'm like, if I'm playing against PE, he can revive them with the Burger-Tiger. If I'm playing against Ver, he can salvage these wrecks for ammo. And I was always baffled. I was always watch other streamers, and like it seemed that other people would only start killing the wrecks like once they've spot the pioneers like actually salvaging, or once they spot like a Burger-Tiger. It's like, oh shit, now he's gonna revive everything. I'm like, brother, you should have thought about this before.
Earlier,
Like, sure, if you went all in and you lost all your tanks, that's different. But if if you see the wreck and it's standing right there out in the open, like, brother, start plunking away at it, because it should just be an instinct. Like, don't leave it to chance.
Exactly.
The last con I would like to talk about, you talked with us before we even started. There is a big problem with hackers. I've never known about that.
Yes, this is more of a thing. I mean, to be honest, I feel like the reason why I guess the community on Twitch, or even before Twitch was more involved, is because I guess for top level players, you kind of spot these things a lot easier, because a lot of the decision making just doesn't make sense. It's kind of like, like when you play like poker, and like a lot of pros will tell you this, that like they can't really understand what new poker players are doing, because the plays they're making makes no sense. It's like they're going all in,
like random.
Yeah, it's just random, but like you can kind of tell that the way someone plays, and it's just like the way they're positioning their shit, the way that they're kind of like always intercepting you.
Always knowing.
Yeah. They're like one step ahead. It's like, but it doesn't make sense, because we're like 3 minutes into the game, and why do you have a like? It was very noticeable to me when I was playing against USA, or if I was playing as USA against Panzer Elite, because these two factions are full on aggressive, like super aggressive. Sometimes as Ver, you could spot it too. Like whenever you were flanking through the fog of war, the NG would just magically be waiting for you, watching the most bizarre fucking like spots, and you'd be like, what the hell is this? Like, that is such a risky play to do. But then the thing is like these risky plays, they start piling up, and it's not just once in a blue moon. It's every single engagement. Like, wow, his AT gun was right there. Like, wow, his MG was there. Like, holy shit. It's like, wow, I went for this tech, and he immediately like got ready for it. And it was most noticeable in when it was Panzer Elite versus US, because the way Panzer Elite worked was you could go tier 1 or tier 2, and what that did is it'll unlock the option to go tier 3 or tier 4. Not long story short, if you go tier 3, you get access to this anti-infantry vehicle, the armored car, the 222 armored car, which decimates infantry. If you go tier 4, it's because you're anticipating your opponent is getting a light vehicle, and so you want to get the anti-tank half-track, which can immobilize like the M8. Okay? If you immobilize an M8, you basically kill it. So the thing is, right, if you had a suspicion that your opponent was map hacking, if you were playing as US and you get the mortar pool, which grants the M8, if you watch the replay, you could basically tell when your opponent was map hacking. The moment you start building the mortar pool or even the supply yard, and you see the PE player instantly build his tier 4 and get the AT half track out, that was a pretty big indication. And then sometimes you had it where the American player would basically like, it was kind of weird. Basically, what would happen is the P player would get like either the armored car or the AT half track, and the American player would get the M8. And both of these players would be stalking each other through the fog of war. And that was basically the biggest way you could tell. And also the AT guns would always be in position. It was very bizarre. But it's just like, it just, the plays wouldn't make sense. And like I said earlier, the plays are just being repeated like nonstop. And it's like, okay, it's too consistent for it to just be like lucky guesses. Like there's something fishy about it, and like you could just tell. It's like, yeah, like this guy's not legitimate at all. And then also it becomes really clear when you get like a counter snipe as US, because if USA wants to get a sniper, you have to make it from a separate tech building, which is a pretty big investment. And you can usually tell when a Wehrmacht player goes from just recklessly non-camouflaging his sniper, because naturally the USA doesn't really have it. You don't get a counter sniper in the first 5 minutes as US, right? Because you're opening up with a barracks. So every Axis player is just moving their sniper. They never cloak them because they know you can never really kill them. But then it's bizarre though. The moment you get your own sniper out, Oh boy, the Axis sniper is always cloaked now. It's like the player just knows. He just knows that the USA has a sniper now, so he's playing super cautiously. You have these type of things too, and then when you're watching the replay, you'll notice the Axis sniper is always uncloaked when the allied sniper is like on the opposite side of the map. It's stuff like this, and you're like, okay, like this right here is kind of my indication my opponent's
when
hacking.
the correlation clearly shows this isn't random anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. Like my opponent just knows he's looking through the fog of war. He can spot my snipers there. Well, he knows that the sniper's there. His sniper can remain decloaked and he can just mindlessly aim move everywhere and just,
Yeah.
snipe my shit. But the moment I come close, though, the cloak is on and now he's playing super cautiously. Like it's not, a casual might say, but that it could just be game sense. It's like, yeah, but like it's too fucking weird, man. Like it's like if the first 3 minutes he was intercepting me, now he's passively playing with the sniper when my counter is out, it's just sus.
Yeah.
So yeah. It's a big problem. Like I said earlier before we started recording, we had a guy from China who was caught map hacking and he was actually streaming it and he apparently said that the reason why he was hacking is because there was this guy who is pretty active in the Co1. He's not part of the community, but he stream snipes like streamers. He uses every single bug in the game, and this guy Stronger said that, well, I'm hacking because I have a feeling this guy's hacking and I just want to equal the playing field. But it's like, bro, like you've put your entire credibility on the line. Like you haven't been streaming for the past 4 years. Now, I don't know if our games were legitimate. And like he was like a position like top 5 Ver player, and now it's like his entire. It was a big problem. It was actually like I said, it's a very big problem, and also it was an excuse that a lot of top players would use too, including myself. Like sometimes I'd lose a game, and I'd be like, I don't even think that guy was legitimate. Sometimes I'd watch the replay and I'd be like, ah, fuck, you know what? I'm watching it now, and maybe he was legit. But it's I don't know. It's just, and now, like I said, because the community is very small, it's either you get pros who've been playing the game since launch, who know the game from the back of their head. So even if you're a new player and you really want to catch up to their level, I just don't think it's worth the time or the investment, because if you don't get these pros, you're going to get these shitters who are abusing the game with broken bugs, or map hackers who just flat out. You even have hackers who will flat out admit they're cheating, but it seems like the relic enforcement email has stopped working, or they just don't care anymore because they're probably focused on Co3. And like because the game goes on sale for like $3 too, even if you get banned, there's nothing stopping you from buying the game again for $3 and continuing. So it's unfortunate, but it's a pretty big problem in multiplayer, to be honest.
Sadly, that kills really a game.
Back in the day, there was also the drop hack, where you pulled out your internet plug and you had like a 50% chance of actually registering a loss on your opponent. That was patched though, but the map hacking now is really pretty rampant. And because of that, it's unfortunate to say this, but I just don't recommend the game if you're into multiplayer. It's not worth it, man. If you want a single player game though, it's definitely a good buy, especially for $10 or even $15. You have a lot of content there with the mods included. So there's that.
Since we are over the 2-hour marks, I would close this off with basically a final question to you. What would you like in a new sequel?
Oh boy. Oh boy. I had high hopes for Co3. I was also in the closed group during the development of the game, so I can't break my NDA there. Honestly, I would really like, if I had to make a Co game, I would like the quality of life of Co3 with the tone of Co1 and probably with the amount of battle groups from Co2. That to me would be truly the best. Like honestly, I think that would be like the best Company of Heroes, because each Company of Heroes has a pros and cons. I do think Co1 overall is the better game, but like I said earlier before we recorded, I'm more of a 1v1 multiplayer guy, so Co2 is not my type of game. Co3 is new. It's a lot more similar to Co1 in terms of the gameplay, the tech decision making, and the TTK. So for me, it's more my ballpark. But I really think if you can get a dev team that has the love and the passion of Company of Heroes 1 with the voice acting, an amazing audio, a great campaign, add in the amount of replayability with extra commanders like Co2, but then you also have the quality of life improvements of Co 3, I truly think you really do have a phenomenal like game. That would be my dream case. I guess we'll have to work 10 years. I mean, I know Co 3's launch was very rough. There's still a lot of people who hate the game. We'll have to see. Chances are, dude, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if we're not even going to see a Co 4 because the reception to Co 3 was very negative. I think if I check Steam right now, I think the game is still sitting at like a 53 positive rating, which is still bad. So honestly, I think the negative reaction might have killed any incentive for Relic to ever make a sequel. But if I had to, in a perfect world and for dreaming, I'd like to see that. That to me would be truly the best Co experience. Co 3 is just not quite there. I don't think it will ever get there because I don't like the tone of Co 3. But that's just me though.
If you add to this mix basically mod support and LAN support, I'm totally with you. I also want that.
Well, yeah. Well, when I said the tone of Co, I guess with the mod support definitely, because Co 1, like I said, is extremely moddable, extremely moddable. But like I said earlier, I don't think we're ever gonna get that because again, I just don't see the business justification of like, oh, we're gonna make, if we want to make battle groups that offer, like, let's say I make a battle group that wants to add in like the King Tiger, which isn't a unit in Co 3. But if I want to add it to a battle group in Co 3, but if I have like Billy, who's made a mod who has the King Tiger by default, I consider Co more of a single. I know Co is more popular in single player, like for skirmishes. So from a business perspective, I don't see how it could be profitable for casuals. Like I don't think casuals would buy this because they get it for free in a mod. However, the counter argument to that would be Relic should do what they did with DayZ, with Bohemia Interactive, with Arma 2. If you wanted to play DayZ, you had to buy every single DLC content for Arma 2. You basically had to buy like 2 games. I remember they cost me $45 basically to play DayZ. And those Arma 2 and Arma 2 Operation Arrowhead, they were like the most sold game on Steam for almost a month because DayZ was like the new thing on the block. So that could be an approach that Relic does. Like, yeah, if you want to play this mod, you have to buy every single content in the game. And I think that would be fine. I think that would be a good justification to allow creators to import like specific unique 3D models. I think that would be really cool. I mean, it worked in DayZ. DayZ had like a bunch of unique guns and it increased the sales of Armor 2 by like tenfold. So it's an approach they could do, but that's more of a Sega decision. And if I look at Sega's track record with like Total War, like they charge you for blood and gore in a Total War game. So
Sadly.
yeah, it's just the way it is. Like, we got to follow the money.
Definitely, sadly. But yeah, I would say we close it off here, if it's all right with you guys.
It's all good. Totally fine. It was a good talk.
Definitely. Thanks for joining.
Always a pleasure, man. Always a pleasure.
Okay, that's it for this review. Leave us a comment, tell us what you think about the game, and of course, play the game. Until next time, bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.